Hello, I'm Bob Carr from Peace UCC. To move us into our panel discussion, first I just want to thank all of the participants, the people who signed up and joined us. Many different faith communities are represented here. There are people from multiple states on this Zoom. So thanks so much, everyone. We intend to make this an annual event, and certainly the people that registered this year will get information about future symposia. So now I want to introduce the moderator of the panel discussion. We're very fortunate to have Reverend David Girth, who's the executive director of Metropolitan Congregations United. You heard Starsky mention this wonderful organization. MCU has been a great partner for Peace UCC, and for those of you who've not had the opportunity to work with MCU, it's a great opportunity for people from multiple churches to work together on complex advocacy opportunities. So thank you very much, David, and over to you.
Thanks, Bob. I have to say to Reverend Antel, I wish you luck, because I get the joy of working very closely with the other two speakers today, Dr. Gould and Dr. Wilson. And so I hope that doesn't bode ill for you. I just think that in the spirit of John Lewis, good troublemakers are pretty good at not only breaking the rules, but making their own rules. So I think it's interesting that the three speakers turned a symposium into a preaching fest. And I thank God that we had good troublemakers lined up as the speakers today, so we could both have a symposium and a preaching fest. I want to pull just a few top lines that caught my attention and hopefully call back your memory to what you heard a little bit earlier this morning. Offer one new image and then a question to get the panel started. So these are a couple of the top lines that caught my attention over the morning. I really appreciated Dr. Gould cutting through all the abstraction with the image of I can't breathe. Let's not make it complicated. Let's make it real. Let's make it experiential. Let's make it so that the pain is unavoidable. And it struck me that what Eric Gardner and George Floyd said is not a different thing from what the young black girl who's 11 times more likely to end up in the ER than a white young girl. It's not a different thing. It is a different aspect of the same thing. And Reverend Antel similarly cut through everything. This was the line that he said very early on that I thought held up a lot of the rest of what he said. The decisions that we make right now create the opportunity or the peril for our children. And it strikes me as we go through the morning here that it's not simply children and grandchildren of the people on this call today, but their children and grandchildren who will be dealing with the opportunities and the perils of the decisions that we make or don't make right now. And then Dr. Wilson, there's an image that was just embedded down deep in one of the things he said. When he's talking about holiness, that holiness is about living up into the crown that God may be holding over your head already. That's a challenging invitation filled with hope and responsibility. So he called back something that Dr. Gould said earlier about Marilyn's children on the other side of town when he said that the challenge for us is to recognize that every child is everyone's child. So those are a few items that caught my attention that maybe will help you recall something else that was powerful for you, or grab it, look through your notes. This two aspects of the same challenge in front of the same evil operating in our world. We are in a moment when maybe climate change denial is on the decrease, but there's an awful lot of indifference. And in the same way, we can't even begin to deny the power of white supremacy. But boy, there's an awful lot of indifference and unwillingness to actually act. So when we're 4 months, just 4 months away from a leader of this country pouring the fossil fuel of hate onto the power of racism, the decisions we make today will have consequences for not only our grandchildren, but their grandchildren. So here's the image. As you all were talking this morning, came to me, I have a literal picture of this. We were last August in Florissant, Missouri, at a protest at the police department after, this is in the middle of the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor uprisings. A Florissant police officer ran over somebody with his vehicle. And so we were taking the heat to the police station in Florissant, and the riot police came out, and the riot police pepper sprayed everybody, and we all pulled back, and people were trying to treat the burns from pepper spray. And Lisa, my spouse, had managed to dodge the pepper spray, and she'd had enough. She walked straight up to the riot police. And so I have a picture of the riot police in a line with Lisa standing in front of them. Here's the connection to today. She was wearing a t-shirt from our church, and the back of that t-shirt says, "Building Beloved Community." So a lot of what we've heard today and what we've been thinking about and why we even came, I think, is that building beloved community means listening to people that we disagree with. It also means sometimes standing up right in front of whatever the literal or figurative riot police are. But this is what made me think about Lisa in front of the riot police. What she said to them, possessed not by a demon, but by an angel. She said she didn't know where it came from. She said, at 55 years old, something that was literally true. "Why are you doing this? I could be your mother." So my question is about being everybody's mother and building beloved community. So I'm going to ask the panel, what did you hear from each other today that maybe you hadn't thought about quite the same way about what it looks like to be mothering the earth and building beloved community?
Well, as people in the UCC know, I'm always unafraid to start, but I hope I don't put my foot too far down my throat. I was just so inspired, Cassandra and Starsky, by what you each said, and what part of what I realized was that the substance of what I said, that climate change is connected with all these injustices. It's one thing to just kind of state that. It's another thing to exemplify it the way you played it out, Cassandra. And Starsky, I'm somebody that back in the 1970s, when the world was afraid of blowing up from nuclear weapons, I started what became a national organization for youth to oppose nuclear weapons. It was called Stop Nuclear War. It had 105 chapters all over the country. And it created a whole bunch of activists, a whole bunch of troublemakers all over the place. But you reminded me that really this intergenerational inspiration that we gain and give is what church ought to be about. So after making those two connections, the thing I want to say back to you, David, is, I think we are in a moment where the church has an opportunity to be rebuilt. And yes, we need to build on the past in terms of particularly the civil rights movement, but other aspects of the past. But there are new challenges that the church, for whatever reason, has not put front and center. And we have named three of them today. Climate change and care for the environment is one. The recognition of inequality, and particularly the unjust impacts on people of color, is two. And the impact of children is three. And if churches were to simply say, our voice should be given to this project, then I can only imagine that the changes that we've already seen in the past 100 days are going to carry forward for the next decades.
Yeah, I'll jump next. One of the things this is the way I'm going to remember your story, Jim. And I don't know if this is historically accurate, But it doesn't have to be because it's going to be true for me. I went, when we launched the State of America's Children Report this year, I was very intentional that we would launch it with Black media. So we released it first to the NMPA, which is a network of Black newspapers across the country, led by Ben Chavis. And we did a call. They do a weekly kind of online call with all their affiliates, including the St. Louis American newspaper, to talk about the report. And they've now done like 3 stories on the report and different aspects of it. But when you told the story of him and the arrest and him declaring this is environmental racism, the way I remember the story is that was not a term of the academy that came off the shelf. The way that I will remember the story as truth is that moments and put it in conversation with the stories that some of which I knew from my sister, Dr. Gould, and the story that David just quoted about Lisa, whom I also love, is that it is in these moments of contention and building and stress, the birth pangs of beloved community, that we come to know what God is calling us to and come to be able to name the reality that we will then go study, right? That it's that moment of distress that where things become clear. And so we are called to engage in the intense struggle so that we can gain clarity. And so that's what I heard in your talk. That's what I heard in the storytelling that my sister was doing from her own experience, that the struggle gave her clarity. And that's what I heard, David, when you told, I could see Lisa.
Very similarly, for each of you, it was how, as the body of Christ, we are called to embody even the pain. And so, Jim, when you talked about, and I know the story about Ben Chavis, right? But when you talked about that, because I know who Ben Chavis is, I saw it, right? It was this manifestation of this is what environmental racism looks like. When you talked about your own arrest, the image that was in my mind was an image of the first anniversary of the murder of Mike Brown, the unatoned for murder of Mike Brown. And we were in front of the federal building downtown. And I saw my brother Starsky going across the barricade to put his life at risk and online and be arrested. And so literally when you said that, I saw Starsky, right? And connecting that even to my own story of however it is breath is extracted from your body, if your body is Black or brown, it is still from the same source. And the call that I think each of us is clarifying and re-ringing the bell even louder for all of us on this call and the people that we're connected to is that how have we embodied the pain? How have we been in proximity enough to the pain that we're able to embody it at a moment's notice? Lisa, Starsky, Jim, all of us in the ways in which we've done that.
This will all be good to call back as we wrap the call in a few minutes about where do each of us who've been participating today see ourselves putting our body. So if you haven't started thinking about, if you've somehow avoided imagining where you want to put your body up till now, it's a good time to get going because we'll have a call for commitment at the end here. Bill Biedenstein asked a question that I think I think several of you, maybe all of you, have been hinting at this morning. And we go back and we think about, a lot of us in Missouri fought very hard to win a cleaning up of the way democracy works and doesn't work in Missouri by limiting the way money gets spent for candidates. We fought really for census representation because we know that Black and brown kids undercounted means that their parents are underrepresented. So this question about what's political power look like? What could it actually look like? Maybe abstractly, but also what might we actually do in the next 18 months that would make sure that those 74 million children have political power? So long-term or short-term, what are you thinking about that question?
I'll go first since I went last, although I think I got the question. I was busy chatting. When I was just, my attention being arrested as well by that 74 million number, and hadn't thought about it, hadn't looked at the number or etc. And reality is like, so, you know, I'm often talking about like the generations and what happened before us, and my role and our role as people of faith in changing the narrative for generations to come. And so just thinking about, you know, so now I got to look at the number of children, you know, in Missouri, particularly, and the children that are in the spaces that we're organizing in, and start to really help to cast a picture of how we are being informed by those children even more, right? Just even that number like compelled me to go deeper around being really specific about what the impact will be beyond like just having to keep, you know, we spend so much time, David knows this, just defending, right? Like being up all night, listening to debates about things that voters have already decided on, but being able to really using sermonic language to really paint the picture even more vibrant colors and connect people to it based on these children that are amongst us that we are called to mother, and what our individual and collective responsibility is to those children.
In response to your question, David, I mentioned in my comments that youth are leading the climate movement. And I just want to make a very concrete reference that I think exemplifies what you're asking. I think it was in January of 2019 when 54, I'm sure of that number, 54 young people sat out in front of, and part of them, some of them inside of Nancy Pelosi's office. And she was not happy about that. And the words Green New Deal were coming off their lips. And what they had in their pockets was the draft of a proposed Green New Deal resolution that had not yet been offered up by AOC and Ed Markey, but it had been drafted by a Black woman under 30 years old. And that's not unimportant in relation to your question. And those young people, many of whom were under 20 years old, were willing to be arrested. They all risked arrest. They infuriated Nancy Pelosi. And as a consequence, what do we have now? But to somebody that's been at it like I have for a long time, and like many people in this conversation been at it for a long time, we have an entire administration which is taking an all of government approach to integrate all those aspects, which only 2 years ago were scoffed at when young people took them to the highest Democrat in the political order. So that's an exemplification, I think, of what this question is that you have. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to offer a couple of things. Number one, I think in my lifetime, very early in my life, I won't say how old I am, but some of y'all are older enough over me that you'll remember this. We changed the voting age in America. And we changed the voting age to 18. That was a drop down. And I wonder if it's time to think about it, taking it to 16. I'm very clear about that. I'm very clear that I have a 16-year-old in my household who is politically informed enough to make a decision about the future of this nation. And quite frankly, much more politically informed and engaged than a lot of the adults that I know. And so as we talk about, as we know, right, as we commit to this concept of a more perfect union, what we're noting is that the project of democracy should evolve. And so perhaps this is an appropriate evolution in a context where young people have access to information, they have a broader, broader access to information, they're more engaged at earlier age with types of issues that we were not, and that it may be an appropriate recalibration to suggest that 16-year-olds should vote. So that's one. I don't believe that they have to be voted for by their parents. I think their parents should have a vote, and I think 16 to 17-year-olds should have a vote. Let me be very clear about that. The other thing I want to say is that we have to name and frame exactly what's happening and the implications of it. Because of the demographics that I talked about who these young people are, the voter suppression efforts are very clear that when white people are not in the majority, we're going to change the rules to make it more difficult for brown people to vote. When we were in that fight last year in Missouri, I talked about my son, who was 15 years old at the time, not being counted in the apportionment of state legislative districts for 10 years, because while they didn't count him in that, they wouldn't count him in their proposal, he was going to be voting by the time the period was up. So I think we have to be very intentional to analyze these voter suppression laws and analyze things like the census recalibration of the redistricting process based upon and through the lens of who the population will be, right? And this is what will help us in this moment where people are trying to shrink democracy because they don't believe, and this is the challenge of the last election, even though somebody lost by 6 million votes, they don't believe that someone elected by anything but a white majority is legitimate, right? Joe Biden is illegitimate because he did not win the majority of the white vote. And our voter suppression efforts are targeted to shrink the Black and brown vote, which is the rising demographic and is the current demographic of children. Voter suppression efforts at the state level are a direct attack on the voices of your children and grandchildren. And I think we have to speak with that clarity because it's an effort to lock them out of the project of democracy. So we need to have an aggressive, I'll echo my friend Don Calloway, who was just last night on Joy Reid suggesting this. Part of what we need as progressives, and you know, I'm not suggesting everybody here is progressive, I'm holding my own kind of posture and position, is we need a more affirmative and forward-leaning approach to things like voter suppression. So we need to be putting 16-year-old voting on the table if people are taking mail-in ballots off the table, mail-in ballots off the table. We've got to have an affirmative vision. And for church people, we have to have a vision that is rooted in our context of faith. And if we believe that children are made in the image and likeness of God, and we don't believe that that starts somehow magically at 18, then we need to be arguing for our theology, that God doesn't flip a switch at 18, that God actually endows with capacity for logic, cognition, and decision-making at very early ages. And then we need to be thoughtful about when we graft that into the process. But I don't think anyone would suggest that it magically happens at 18.
I want to ask one more question. It gets back to the church a little bit more, and then we'll work on some calls to action and opportunities for people to get involved. I feel this terrible tension whenever we talk about addressing structural racism, because I want everything moving now. I want no place to hide until I'm in an uncomfortable position. Then I want a little more time to think about it. And whenever we talk about any kind of social justice, political movement, addressing of racial inequity and white supremacy in the church, the first thing we want to do is read a book. So I'm wondering, and we just know, like, we've got 400 years of structure building. We don't get out of 400 years of structure building and attitude engineering in our brains and hearts in a workshop, or maybe even in a lifetime. So I'm wondering, when you imagine the congregations that you know and love, how do you hold that tension? What's the activity, faithful activity inside a congregation look like that is impatient, but also graceful? And it makes me think again about Marilyn Stavenger. I don't know, I wish I had a good specific story, but my recollection of Marilyn is that when we were screwing up individually or collectively, she had a way of just saying that with that mother of the church. Like, my grandmother only laid her hands on me one time that I remember, because she had the look. She never had to touch me. She had the look. I think Marilyn had the look. And then when you said, oh, she was there with the embrace that you needed to support you to do the hard work that you had just acknowledged you needed to do. What's the church look and feel like that is unrelenting about what we must face and relentlessly graceful?
Yeah, I'm impacted today by having started the day listening to a clip, an extended address by Dr. James Cone, addressing Concord Church in New York. And part of what he was kind of rehearsing, the late James Cone, I should say, part of what he was rehearsing was this, his own evolution to evolve, being able to evolve to a point where he was able to speak in plain language about his faith and affirm the community that he came from by just using their talk. He talked Black talk. He's just like, I just needed Black talk. He's like, I think the first moves, the first books that he wrote were all in kind of Eurocentric theological language and grounding, and kind of doing the work that, you know, we Black people have to do, which is like prove to white dominant culture that we can operate with all of their marks, right? We have to wear the right stuff and say the right words and treat the right scholars and have the right footnotes. And so he had done all that, and then he came to this point where he just needs to be able to kind of affirm Black folks, Black community, and where he came from by using Black talk. So I say this to say, first, I think part of it is the church that is doing this work first has to affirm regular, my dear sister Carissa Anderson in St. Louis says, use regular words. She says just like that, not regular, regular. Use regular words. To the point of Dr. Gould today, tell regular life stories. Storytelling is the bridge between policy and communication that helps people to understand. So we have to tell stories. That community, that church is telling its own story, affirming its own language. And I'm tired of sermons that use the language of white supremacy and white nationalism and all kind of isms, and show people what it is. So from the pulpit, we're using regular stories. We're affirming our own culture, and that's what it feels like. It's regular talk that gets people to understand. It's also vibrant, vital, life-framing worship. There are going to be people who get out on the front lines, and I appreciate that. There are going to be people who get out in the streets. One of the great challenges for me in DC is I don't know local people well enough yet to like be out in the street with folks. But so I miss St. Louis in that way. But I think some of it is about having a rich enough life together. Right? You said something, you said, what does it feel like? A rich enough life together that we feel supported to take risks, to do that together. And so I think that's part of what that congregation is like as well. And that has much to do with how vital the worshiping life is, and including elements of spontaneity and renewal in that worshiping community. So I'll stop there. There's more stuff, but those are the two key marks.
So for the last 9 years now, I've been framing most of my work around church, around Beyond the Walls. It was the title of my dissertation, is the name of my virtual ministry. And the church, like, I don't believe God caused the pandemic, but I believe that God is happy that we are not in these buildings. I built one. It was a great building too. But our work was never in the building. And we have, by and large, located all of the work in the building. And so even when we do our book studies, which just drives me on the other side of insane, I've told a couple of congregations that are part of Missouri Faith Voices, call me when you're ready to actually do something. Because I don't want to come and give words of disencouragement on your book study. Beyond the walls is where we can get in more proximity of folk who are living in the pain. So even in, in black and white church, which is still very segregated, and that might be okay, but we have to not just have superficial relationships with Black colleagues, but what does it look like? I said this in my breakout room. I believe that the reparation starts with the church. It starts with relationships, and I'm not just talking about a check, but it starts with relationships, authentic relationships, and not just pulpit swaps. It starts with being able to hear the stories, not just going on a tour of Ferguson, but being able to hear the stories of the people who are in proximity of the churches on the other side of Maryland's town. Like, what is it? Tamika Mallory uses the term to be an accomplice as opposed to an ally. See, when we're an accomplice, it means if you go down, I'm going down too. It means whatever happens to you is going to happen to me. And until the body of Christ can actually model that, then we are really being hypocritical, and we're not also using our power. Speaking truth to power is usually located outside of wherever we are. And I believe that it's a day of reckoning for us inside, that we must have these really hard conversations with each other and call each other into accountability. Because if I go down and you're not going down with me, see, an ally is not going to go down with me. They'll send me some cigarettes when I get to jail, because I will start smoking. But an accomplice means you are going where I go. How you are treated, I am treated. And so we need accomplices. We need to really break down the racial barriers and let us go together and see and model it for the world. In the streets, the folk are together. Like, they don't really care which neighborhood you came from. They certainly don't care about your church, your religion, and all of that. They are together. And so that is the church that I am learning from. And that's the church that I believe we all are called in this moment to learn from.
When you spoke earlier, Cassandra, you said the real church that was in the streets, that phrase, and you've just brought it up again. And it's got to be the case that what we do when we come together, whether it's on Zoom or whether it's in a church building, that sparks us, it capacitates us, it challenges us, it kicks us in the butt to take our commitment to the streets and to do it, as you were just saying, together at a depth that, frankly, we are not accustomed to. And so this somewhat innocuous suggestion that I make every time I speak, which is churches should invite somebody from the congregation to bear testimony to some change that they or their family have made in the past week or month around climate change. What if, in addition to that, in the context of what's just been said the past few minutes, what if we need to amplify that and vulnerably stand up in front of the congregation and saying, I feel God calling me to take a risk in the coming week or month as I hear that, such and such is going to be happening within 20 miles of our church. And for me to engage in that would be a risk. And I am coming before you today to ask for your support. What if that became a kind of an opportunity for the worship community to extend its life, that life, as you were saying at Starsky, the vital life framing worship, so that that frame then gets formed in the church and then it gets sent out from the church, so that others in the pews who would never have stood up to even voice that risky thing, that they're saying, you know what, if Fred is going to do that, we need to support him in some way, and then really everything begins to change. Thank you, David, for that excellent question, and Starsky and Cassandra for your comments too.
The image of Jesus feeding the multitude suggests that we have everything that we need right here, if we have the faith to trust each other and trust God's providing. So we have to call on that. The first call to action requires that in fact, what we need is right here. We may not believe it right now, but what we have is right here. We cannot allow Dr. Wilson to be in Washington, D.C. without a protest buddy. The first call to action is somebody on this call has got to fix him up with a protest buddy so that he is not stuck at work and stuck at home with nobody to go to the street with. Okay, so if we can get that one taken care of, I got a couple of others. The organizers of the event have been working on compiling some of the references. There was at least one reference to a documentary, a local study, a handful of books. I couldn't write fast enough to keep up with Dr. Wilson's references, but we've got some materials that folks can use to do your homework and maybe to engage some folks in your congregation. Those will be coming through to you with a follow-up email. I think the frame here for the call to action is twofold. It's, where can you imagine yourself putting your body, maybe even to the point of arrest? Somebody said, lots of people say they're willing to die for a cause, but nobody's doing anything to get killed for it. So let's just say maybe enough to get arrested. And the challenge to begin living in a liberation theology of children is not first an activity of writing and reflection, it's creating experiences. So what are the ways that we can begin living in a liberation theology of children? And the first one I would suggest came to us this morning. What can you do to stop line 3? Let's not get more fossil fuels out of the ground and into the atmosphere. So there's one specific action that anybody anywhere in the country could actually be a part of. The second one is local here in St. Louis. We'll get you some more details, but July 24th, people from the east side and the west side will meet in the middle of the Mississippi River, because the Mississippi River actually connects us, not divides us. And it's a place that gives us life, and it's a place that carries pollution up and down the river. And the industrialization of that river is absolutely linked to the racial history and inequity of the region. So you'll get some more information about that as a joint action of a bunch of groups on July 24th, bridging the rivers that divide us. The third thing I would say that any of us could also be doing, and could be done with a liberation theology of children in mind, look at all of the federal money that is moving right now, $500 million in the city of St. Louis, and more on the way once Congress and the president get done negotiating what he laid out the other day. How much of that money is going to be spent in ways that fuel racial equity and a healthier environment and world for us? What would it look like in your congregation to start by having a conversation driven by young people's reactions to those dollars? Where do they think those dollars should go? And what's the adult response to that leading? So let me just ask if the three of you have any other specific calls to action that I didn't catch there. You want to get in front of the group, and there'll be a follow-up communication with details.
I was looking for the flyer that I can't find, but I'll make sure it gets sent out. And so this is just around defending democracy in general. On May 8th, across the country, there are a set of actions, good trouble actions, to ensure that the John Lewis voting right is enacted in Congress. And so we are co-sponsoring an event that will start at Sumner High School. And I will make sure that Wendy and Bob get the information to send out to you. I would also say, in general, if you're not a part of an organizing shop, call David or call me. Metropolitan Congregations United or Missouri Faith Voices. I know there are people that are across the country, but we can also get you connected with those who also might be in your community.
I'll just add to this, an easy call to action is look in your wallet and see if you have a Chase credit card in there. And if you do, prayerfully consider standing up in front of your congregation, or you could do this on Zoom. And first of all, learning about it, look at a website called Stop the Money Pipeline. That's the name, stopthemoneypipeline.org. They'll have all kinds of suggestions on there. But in the context of worship, you could, you have announcements during worship, right? Hold up your credit card and cut it in half. And share with your congregation that you read to them the short letter that you wrote to the president of JP Morgan Chase, that so long as they are lending money to fossil fuel companies to continue to build out their infrastructure, you no longer want to be one of their customers. And man, will you ever start a conversation in your congregation?
Yeah, a couple of things I would say. Number one, in the context of the national dialogue about federal policy on the American Families Plan, that you contact your congresspeople to encourage them to choose. The next piece of the conversation, now that we've seen it laid out, is going to be how we pay for it. So I encourage you to contact your congresspeople to encourage them to choose babies over billionaires, that we invest to make sure that the child tax credit extensions, again, I would encourage you to say become permanent, but at least keep them, because I think they're going to be put on the table. But that we extend the child tax credit adjustments that have been allocated, that we make sure that we keep the 12 weeks paid family medical leave that is laid out, and that we keep the investments in increased SNAP benefits and child nutrition that are in the American Families Plan. So those are critical pieces I would suggest to you from a policy standpoint that your congresspeople need to hear from you on and in this moment. The other things I would invite you to as a congregational body, and I know Peace is already doing some work in this regard, is that CDF is asking communities of faith to do two things this year. Number one, listen to the children, and very specifically ask the question, where does it hurt? When we are listening to children, that'll be the theme and engagement for faith communities that gather with us virtually in July, the week of July 19th, for our Proctor Institute for Child Advocacy Ministry, with leaders from across the country, including our own Otis Moss III and others who are part of that, to talk about how listening to children will actually lead to revolution in our own values. So the skill building workshops, preaching child plenaries around child policy issues, including our growing commitment to a guaranteed income through a child allowance. The other thing is we talk about our list of where does it hurt? We're encouraging people to ask children very specifically and create forums for them to tell you how the pandemic has impacted them. And that's the theme of our October National Observance of Children's Sabbaths on the weekend of October 19th. We'll be addressing that from the pulpit of the Riverside Church, broadcasting across the country. But we also have toolkits that are already developed to encourage congregations to extend and expand that witness by doing the last thing I'm going to encourage you to do, which is to host a Child Watch event. Child Watch we have resources for this, but it's an opportunity for you and your congregation to go and see how an issue is impacting children. Whether that means you're going to a local hospital to see how the healthcare system works or does not work for young people, whether you're scheduling a visit to a public school so you can see the environment that young people are growing up in those schools are educated in, or whether you're going to visit the juvenile justice or detention centers in the community. But all the resources to support that are on the website, childrensdefense.org, letters to help you get it organized, ways that you can structure it. So we're inviting you to listen to children, to ask where it hurts, and to engage in the child watch in your local community.
So thank you all for troubling the waters that we swim in and for showering those troubled waters with some grace of hope and wonderful ideas. Pastor Wendy, we're back to you, I think.
Okay. Well, I just want to thank everybody for attending this inaugural Social Justice Symposium in memory of Marilyn Stavenger, Mothering the Earth, that we have done alongside Eden Seminary. I want to just end with a quote from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. It sits on my desk here at the church, where I am actually not very often anymore these days of pandemic. But here it is. You will know it very well. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. I would say to that, it's not things that matter, but it is to the children who matter to us, because they are all our children. And so I would ask us to leave this time together with a challenge that we will change the world so that our children will inherit something of worth. Go in peace, everyone.